We have a special guest star today for our Meat on the Bone segment. Her name is Laura Morton, and she's not only a mental health advocate, but she's also a New York Times bestselling author and documentary director. She has authored over 60 books and has a staggering 21 New York Times bestsellers. Laura co directed, produced, and wrote the award winning documentary Anxious Nation, her first feature, focusing on the crisis of anxiety in America and especially its impact on our youth and their families, which is available for streaming on Amazon, Google Play, and Apple TV. So we are honored to have her as a guest on our show today. And Laura, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction.
In this show, in Money Matters with Mike, we often will talk about how money woes and money worries can create a lot of anxiety for people. I mean, it's, the leading cause of divorce. And people either don't like talking about money or they hide their money worries from even their spouse. Your film focuses on really the anxiety issue for younger people. I know that your daughter is someone who is featured in the film, which I thought was very brave of her to be featured. Talk about sort of your experience in dealing with someone that close to you who has struggled with so much anxiety.
Well, thank you for asking. My daughter is the reason I made the film. I felt like I was failing as a parent. I just thought that everything that I was trying to figure out, she just wasn't seeming to get any better. And, there was a day in my office in 2018 where I just felt very alone. I thought what was happening in our home was only happening in our home. I put a post on Facebook, Kids and Anxiety, Who's Dealing with It? And remember, this was 2018. And we just weren't talking about mental health the way that we're talking about it today. The response that I got was pretty spectacular and shocking because it didn't just come from my, and I'm air quoting, Facebook friends. It came from people that I knew well, people that I had dinner with recently, and we had never talked about what was happening with our kids. I'm a storyteller by trade. I thought there had to be something going on here. I wanted to know if we were more anxious or just more aware of it. I wanted to know why. And more importantly, and most importantly, I wanted to understand what to do about it. You mentioned like we don't like to talk about our financial woes. We really don't like to talk about our mental health woes. The stress that it can put on a relationship is significant. But when you have that stress, that trickles down. Your kids feel it. And whether you think you're, shielding it and keeping it from them, they absolutely can feel that feeling coming off of you, all of that anxiety that you're carrying with you. And for many, it turns into depression because it goes untreated. So I think it's really interesting to talk about that correlation.
I can speak for my family has dealt with anxiety in the past, whether it was for the health challenges that we went through, whether it was, because of our kids and everything that they have gone through. I have a 22 and almost 27-year-old daughter, and they've both battled with, anxiety throughout their lives. And I do think that they experience things a lot differently than we experience things when we were that age. So, the documentary that you put together was revelatory in bringing that to light. And I do, as a father, I appreciate that as well. But, you say that the anxiety crisis is going on in the United States has reached epidemic levels in the past few years. What do you think are maybe some of those contributing factors to the anxiety spikes?
So let me put it into perspective for you. If you had a high school of 1,000 students, 450 of them are saying that they're persistently sad and hopeless. 200 are saying they've considered suicide, and 100 have actually tried. If we don't consider that a crisis, then we really need to rethink what is a crisis. People love to go for the low-hanging fruit, that it's our devices, it's, social media. And there's no question that there's correlation. So often, anxiety can be generational. It can be situational. So right before I hopped on this call with you guys today, I was on a call with a woman who lived in Colorado, and her son was at the STEM high school when there was a shooter. Through all of the different things that our kids are dealing with today, right? Our kids are worried about global warming, the state of politics. They're worried. There's so many things. Was that all around when we were younger? Yeah, and for sure. But I don't think that it felt as big as it feels today. And I think that our kids are responding naturally to a lot of really unnatural circumstances. Active shooter drills in schools, and that shouldn't be a normalized experience for our kids. Being afraid to go to a shopping mall or a movie theater because you might, or a nightclub because, or a bowling alley. The angst of that now is the way that our kids move through the world.
Mm.
And yet, I think it's really interesting because I think there are some really great things that can come from social media. I think that there are, so it's not all bad. I'm actually, not like one of these parents that thinks that we just have to obliterate it. I do think that we have to hold the companies, the social media companies and the platforms to a better standard. Currently they're protected under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which says that they're not liable for any third-party posting on their platforms. This is a law that was put into place in 1996. It predates any one of these platforms.
Right.
So I think it's really, an opportunity for tech to self-regulate. And that's what I have a problem with. I think that tech shouldn't be allowed to self-regulate any more than big tobacco or big pharma.
Kind of, pivoting a little on that, obviously the younger demographic are definitely getting hit and probably the hardest. But according to research, a surprising statistic, at least to me, was that the senior citizen community levels were also on the rise. And what might you attribute that to?
So the biggest surprise audience that we've had for Anxious Nation has been grandparents. And so, listen, I think they're lonely. I think what's interesting when you bring that statistic up is that our kids actually, 72% of our kids identify as being lonelier than senior citizens.
Mm.
Okay. But our senior citizens have, gone through the 2008 housing crisis. So maybe they were set up a little better financially before that crisis. And now are finding themselves not able to retire in the way that they wanted to. I think they're incredibly lonely. I think they legitimately don't understand what's going on with their generations, that are coming up behind them, their kids and their grandkids. There's a lot that probably contributes to that loneliness, but it's absolutely there. Look, we live in a world now where we primarily communicate through our devices, our phones, text messaging, right? So
Yes.
picking up the phone and calling someone, going and seeing somebody in person just doesn't happen nearly as much anymore. My daughter communicates with her grandparents on FaceTime. That's just not the same as quality time together. And we've lost that connection among our families. We've lost that connection among our communities. And we were never meant to be singular. We were meant to be plural.
Yeah, meant to
Yeah.
be together, especially as family units like that. Like no matter what your family looks like, you're meant to be together. And as we approach the holiday season, of course, that's a great reminder as well. And one of the great things I think about the film is that you don't just kind of lay out the problem, right, of anxiety and explain it, which is obviously a very important part of this discussion. But you also talk about how a lot of these kids, these teens, these young adults are able to cope. I remember her making a comment that it doesn't go away,
Yeah.
but you just sort of learn to deal with it. And just for lack of a better term, how would you say that translates to maybe the older population who are retired, planning to retire, and are in that situation? That very lonely situation that we were just talking about.
I think that when you isolate, that's a breeding ground for all of these other feelings. Whether you're a teenager that just never comes out of your bedroom, or you're a senior who just doesn't leave the house. What you're left with are your thoughts that begin to spin and spin and spin. And so what I think is the most important takeaway from the film, and it's the tagline from our film, is that anxiety is just energy, right? So what do we do with that energy? We can learn to harness anxious energy and use it for good. So if you're a senior and you're feeling anxious, you're feeling lonely, you're feeling disconnected, go take an art class, learn to paint. Take that energy and pour it into something creative. Maybe learn to play the piano. Maybe you always wanted to learn, a musical instrument. There are so many things that you can do when you connect to nature. It's so good for the mind, right?
That does it for me for sure.
Yeah, it's so good for the mind. So taking a walk, if you have a pet, our pets are really, great ways for us to love and feel loved and to have that warm, that warm, fuzzy feeling that we all need. It's energy. And it's in our DNA. We were meant to be anxious in the right circumstances. It's the fight or flight response. So, if you're getting that icky gut feeling, that's supposed to be there, right? If you're walking to your car at night and you just don't feel safe, whatever it is. I think it's so important to understand that you can take that energy. And we see it all the time. We see it in athletes. Look, pickleball has become really popular for seniors, and that's a great way to connect and have community. So get out and do something, and if you can understand those two things and you can take that energy and you can repurpose it, I think that you'll be less anxious for sure.
It's something I have personally never dealt with, like never. But my entire family does, and my mom, my daughters, my wife at times, and it's hard for me to comfort them because I don't understand it. And unless I've gone through it, it's just, I'm a guy, and it's much more difficult for me to, be that sounding board or that, shoulder to cry on type of person. So
it's pretty common. Thank you for sharing that with me. It's pretty common to feel that way. I will share with you that I didn't get what my daughter's anxiety was. And I say it in the film, the end of the film, I say I didn't understand it. And I didn't understand that there were things that I was doing that was actually adding to the problem, because I always thought I was coming from this very loving, caring place. And in my effort to, shield her, I was actually making things worse. First of all, that you can even say that is a huge step, right? If the film does anything, I think it'll give you a little understanding and empathy for here's what I didn't know. I really didn't understand that what my daughter was feeling was very real to her, even if I thought it was ridiculous.
Right.
Lots of things I thought, oh, she's being manipulative. She just doesn't want to do this. And it took me a long time to understand that what she was feeling was legit. It's how she processed. And I had to take a step back and go, I don't think it's fair that I put my expectations on her. I have to honor and understand.
Wow. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And really, embrace who she is and not who I want her to be. Yeah. Because I didn't come from an anxious background. I'm probably more anxious today than I've ever been. Make a documentary about anxiety and you'll have a little anxiety, right? It was a big takeaway for me. And it's been a game changer in our relationship and in her anxiety. She still struggles. Yeah. She's almost 16. The new ratcheted up anxiety in our house is that she's taking driver's ed. But you've been there, done that. What we can hope for is that we reach into that toolbox and we'll be able to manage it when it shows up.
Yeah, and I think that goes for obviously our children, but also our parents as they age, and especially if one of them passes and the survivor is there by themselves a lot, and they're in a house by themselves alone a lot. We don't write letters anymore either, because
you're right.
Because we have all the devices. But I remember as a child living in Germany, we used to look forward to getting letters, and it was our connection to home. So,
I love that you said that, because I am a letter writer, because I still understand, one, the connection of pen to paper is good for you, right? But the connection when somebody opens that letter is good for them. So I really love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Isolation doesn't care if you're 75 or 7. Right? And neither does anxiety.
How impactful is that? I hope our listeners have been able to take something away from that. Anxious Nation is the name of the documentary. You can find it on the web at anxiousnation.com. I'll probably start it over and watch it with the family.
Good idea, especially with what you just told me.
Yeah.
It's hard to get through for someone who struggles with what you just shared with me, because it really pokes, right? But we have to have the important conversations, right? Even if they're hard.